welcome the audience here in person. Welcome also those observing us online. A huge welcome to my illustrious panel, General Piotrowski, General Marlowe, Dr. Peterson, General Wroński, and General Hodges. Land warfare, the unthinkable. Well, if we note the fact that there have been land conflicts going on in Georgia and Ukraine in the past few years, not really so unthinkable. I will direct my first question to General Hodges. As a senator here in Poland, my region included the Suwałki region, the Suwałki Gap, and I remember being particularly interested a few years ago in a report in the Washington Post about the fact that the Suwałki Gap was particularly vulnerable to any attacks because of the narrow corridor. So that perked my interest, that I have been interested in the subject ever since. So I would like to ask General Hodges what you think is the probability of a conflict on the eastern flank, and furthermore, how quick you think that we could count on a NATO response if there were to be a problem. And finally, I think most people would wonder, in view of what happened recently with a sort of lack of coordination in the withdrawal of Afghanistan, whether we could count on a coordinated response.
Ambassador, thank you. So, of course, our job, or my job was, and you have commanders here today, the job is to keep it unthinkable, to keep it unlikely that there would ever be a conflict along on the eastern front of NATO. And I think the only way, exactly as Marcin said, the way you keep it unlikely is, of course, to be prepared for it and to demonstrate capability, to train, to practice, and of course to back it up with logistics. I think Russian Federation forces, they look over, they see enhanced forward presence battle groups, they see a strong Polish armed forces, they see American rotational forces, but if they don't see the logistics, ammunition, the ability to move quickly, then I think the chance of the Kremlin making a terrible miscalculation begins to go up. And so there's, I think, three things that I would want to highlight that I know these commanders are working on. The first is speed of recognition. How fast can we recognize what's happening? It won't be a column of T-72 tanks. That will not be the first thing that we see. That's what I thought when I was a lieutenant in Germany a very long time ago. It was going to be tanks and BMPs. Today, it's going to be all the other things that are below the line, followed probably by salvos of missiles and rockets, cyber, and other disruptive activities that make it difficult for us to recognize what's happening so you can start processes. So the importance of intelligence sharing, getting the policies in place that allow us to share information and intelligence, regardless of what nation it is, I think is important. We have too much locked up inside of Five Eyes, when in fact most of the people who know what's happening are not going to be Five Eyes nations. The second thing is speed of decision, the ability to start movement. All of this is going to be happening in pre-crisis conditions, which means all EU road regulations are still in effect, that our civilian leaders have to go through the process to make decisions. And so how can we accelerate the decision-making process so that commanders can begin to take ammunition out of bunkers, to begin to deploy, to alert the VJTF, and also to start working with Polish or German Deutsche Bahn DB Cargo to begin movement. And then the third thing, of course, is the speed of assembly. We have to be able to move as fast or faster than Russian Federation forces to the point of potential crisis to demonstrate that we are ready. Now, of course, this is not the United States doing it alone. It has to be in consultation which we failed to do coming out of Afghanistan, as you sort of highlight, Ambassador, in consultation with our allies at the ground level, but also at the capitals.
So I think recently, in view of what General Hodges says, recently experts have been saying that because of high-powered MSR systems, everything, the capability of NATO to function properly in the conventional warfare may be limited or less effective than it would be normally. And even the German armed forces have been criticized that perhaps they're not as conflict ready as they could be. So let me say that if that is the case, how do you actually see NATO responding to how quickly and how effectively would you see NATO responding to such a situation? General Marlowe, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And this is, in fact, a challenge that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But let me take a quick look back in order to understand why the situation is as it is. Because until 2014, we all, not only Germany, we all were focused on fighting terrorism worldwide and respectively changed our structures and capabilities. And I think we all agree that 2014 was a game changer in that regards, and we all started to refocus on warfighting, on collective defense. But the capabilities that we lost are not easy to reestablish. But I think the development is currently well underway, and I can assure you that we are, be it on a national basis or in NATO, we are training for warfighting and try to enhance our capabilities. And this is not only limited to Germany. This is, I think, a general challenge in our NATO nations. We all have studied Russian armed forces since then, and their doctrine and their operations. And I think we came to some findings where we identified the strengths that they developed, which are challenges for us. And I will only name a few that I think are really of concern, which is their ability to quickly employ indirect fires within the whole depth of the combat zone seamlessly. This is something we have to address. It is their idea and the new structure of battalion task groups, which are, I would say, have a relatively interesting internal structure in the combination of close combat troops and indirect firing elements, as well as their ability to work at from the Russian soil at the inner line, so to say, in order to quickly concentrate troops along the whole border of Russia, compared to us, where we are at the outer line. And last but not least, the unilateral structure, which is also something which allows quicker decision making. I think from their weaknesses that I would say we can identify is still their hierarchical structure and going along with it, a limited flexibility, as well as a comparably large force, which is, as we see it, not fully logistically supportable along multiple conflict areas. So compared to that, what do we have on our side and on positive developments since then, and what you just addressed? So first of all, I think what is really impressive since 2014 is the demonstration of NATO cohesion, and this is expressed by what was already mentioned, enhanced forward presence, by extremely increased exercise activities. It is the establishment of the NATO response force and the very high readiness joint task force, as well as the continuing process of adjustment of force structures and capabilities. I think one of our advantages is also that we know the terrain. We are in the possible areas where an enemy could stage a conflict, and that gives us the chance to prepare and plan and to think about possible solutions, and to also synchronize national and NATO plans in that regards. I think one big positive point on our side is also the increased engagement of our US partners in Europe, which is extremely important and which I personally experience more or less on a daily basis in our own activities. And I just want to name a few, let's say, the re-establishment of the Fifth Corps with elements here, forward elements here in Poland, with the establishment of critical force enablers like an artillery brigade and so forth. And I think also NATO adjusted within the NATO command structure as well as the NATO force structure. Risks that I see is, this is not only related to land forces, but also is the difference in the threat perception within NATO. So I think our allies directly at which have a border to Russia have a different perception of the threat than probably other nations. The potential of an increasing capability gap between the US army and the European armies, and going along with that, the whole question of interoperability. I would not even speak about interchangeability because that's the next step. I would be happy if we could achieve a seamless interoperability. And finally, that we as European partners probably have to deliver more in the future in terms of capabilities in order to relieve our US colleagues, but also to show our commitment in that regards. Yeah, I'll probably leave it with that for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we see from the Russian side, Russian armed forces, an awful lot of propaganda. And so let me turn now to General Piotrowski. Zapad 21, every time there's any exercises, it's a huge thing, supposedly to make us all afraid that they were going, in case there was an attack. So let me ask you, what can we learn from these exercises? And secondly, on the other hand, what can we learn from the NATO Defender live exercises?
First of all, thank you very much for the question, as well as thank you very much for the invitation to the panel and possibility to discuss such important issue like land warfare on the eastern front of NATO, which is excellent. Thank you very much, and I totally agree with you, Miss. We have to exactly understand our enemy without any doubts, not adversary, but enemy, and what are the targets. There is no doubts. We have no doubts that Russia is very determined and ready to regain the global status as a global power. And there is a lot, let me say, circumstances that those circumstances help a lot Russia to achieve such kind of goal. The second issue, which I consider, is Russia is totally obsessed on the having so-called limitroffs. It means buffer zone, and the sphere and zone when Russia can control situation or at least influence the situation. And I'm afraid that we as a Poland, we are in this part of the zone. And when Russia plans, execute the exercises, we suffer a lot such kind of approach, not only during the exercise. And what is also very important, the military power for Russia, Russian army is not the first responder, not the first tool for the Russia, but for sure very strong tool to respond and to influence and to shape the environment. Even it is possible, necessary in the border, within the border on the soil of Russia. And what is very important for us, Russia significantly uses not necessarily military means to achieve the goals, like info ops, which we suffer last weeks and months, provocation, coercion, no doubts, and spying and psyops also. And all of these factors, I mean about Russia's aims, as well as those measures, were planned, implemented, and executed during the Zapad 21 exercise. We exactly remember the first time when General Zhuravlev, the commander of the Western Military District, announced in January this year that Zapad 21 exercise has already started. It was in January. After that, we observed a lot of activities, step by step, totally with so-called doctrine of Chekhinov and Bogdanov. And after Chekhinov and Bogdanov writings, Mr. Gerasimov in 2013 announced and repeated once again all of these stages and all of the indicators. And those stages were implemented starting from January 2021 till, I strongly believe, this time, because officially between 10 and 16 of September, there was the active officials mainly dedicated to DV days and shows, part of Zapad. But the Zapad exercise still is executed and conducting on the Russian soil. And the process of preparation, Grom, Thunder exercise, which is going to be conducted on October this year, is also part of Zapad 21 activities. What can we learn? There is no doubt that this exercise was bigger than Zapad 2017 and 19, not by the number of troops, but for sure by capabilities and kinds of units. I mean about airborne, air assets, maritime component, special forces. What was new on July, Russia dedicated special part of Zapad activities, let me say, under the Zapad umbrella activities, exercise under the nickname of Zasłon 21, Russians' name of this exercise. This part was dedicated to National Guard and Territorial Defense Forces. This exercise was totally linked between Belarus and Russia. And from our side, in accordance with my assessment, this exercise was extremely effective, despite the fact it was the first edition of such kind of exercise. After this exercise, we have no doubts that Belarusian armed forces, air component, land component, as well as special forces, and each, or maybe not single soldier, but each single kind of force is totally integrated without any independence from the Belarusian side. They received order from Russia side. They followed those orders. There is no doubts. What was unexpected? Frankly speaking, after the main stage, we expected the Russia will have a bigger component on Belarus soil, like at least one brigade-sized combat team. But frankly speaking, they left their one battalion of air defense and low number of air assets. And what was important but didn't surprise us, sorry, was the concealment of the offensive character of the exercise. Literally, it was defensive exercise, but now we are analyzing the scenario. Sorry. Sorry. We are analyzing scenario of the exercise, but there is no doubt till this day this exercise were dedicated to offensive action against Poland and Western countries.
How does that compare to the NATO Defender live exercises? How do the Russians observe the? Because I guess they're looking. I'm not a military person, so if I'm asking a naive question, excuse me, but I'm just wondering how it compares.
Officially, in accordance with Russia's propaganda, they have exactly the same observation. Like, we are defenders, and Western, especially NATO, are offenders of us. and they are going to attack us. We know the truth. But speaking about Defender, we really need such kind of activities, not only as an umbrella for a bigger number of exercise, but mentioned by General Hodges, I fully agree and support those three main factors. But what we have to firstly plan, after that exercise, implement, is a process of generation of force. There is no doubts. And after that, how to establish very clear, relatively simple C2 structure under the force. What kind of process of planning, transfer of authorities and handover of forces during the road and on the theater. And what is very important also, in the very dynamically changing environment, is battle space management. Because we have some, let me say, mentioned by General Hodges and by General Marlowe, national regulations, national solutions, and we have to find a common platform. And we have to be prepared, act, and sometimes react very, very rapidly without any not necessary delay. And large-scale exercises conducted in many countries. It is what we really need, and this opportunity gives us such kind of exercise like Defender.
Thank you. So let me turn now to Dr. Peterson. The general said that the Belarusian forces and the Russian forces are together. They have their own, You spent so much time in the Ukraine. You have written some amazing papers about the Ukraine and land warfare and the situation there. So I am wondering, how do you see NATO there in the Ukraine? And also, let me touch the subject of hybrid warfare, which is also a part, I think, of this land warfare situation. So can you share your views as how would you view the situation in view of what is happening in Ukraine, one country where we do actually still tend to see the land warfare for the last few years?
Thank you. I would start by just saying that the general staff, the Russian general staff, and I are in a different universe than the people on this stage, because we don't even operate under the same lexicon. For us, even the title of this panel is inappropriate. There is no such thing as land warfare. There's warfare. And with, I would start by saying I would also disagree with Lieutenant Hodges during the Cold War, who was expecting the Russian tanks to come across the border. That's not how it would start. The Soviets then calculated that 50% of NATO's firepower was delivered by fixed-wing aviation. So they needed to rapidly shift the correlation of forces. You do that by suppressing the main operating bases. You don't let them fly. And they understand. As a matter of fact, they even had a joke. They used to say, after the end of the war, and two Soviet marshals are enjoying coffee in Paris, and one says, how'd the air battle go? We don't know. They don't care. Because they didn't care if they lost every single fixed-wing aviation asset so long as NATO fixed-wing assets didn't fly. Now today, the Russians feel differently. They feel that even greater reliance on fixed-wing aviation. I can't tell you what the exact figure is, but it's more than 50% from their perspective. Now, the blue guys here can say the Russians are wrong, and that's fine, because you're the experts on the blue side. But from the red side, the first 3 to 5 days of offensive operations, they intend to make sure that there is no NATO fixed-wing aircraft flying. So if NATO ground forces expect to have any air support, it's going to be from rotary aviation. That's it. because that's all there's going to be. That's the only possibility. Aircraft like the Apache that can get off main operating bases and keep moving because they will be hunting. The Russian army is terrified by the Apache, and so they have created and are in the process of creating teams of their best helicopters to try to hunt them down, understanding that just like fixed-wing aircraft, they don't match up very well with our stuff. But that's what they can do, so they'll try to do the best they can. And right from the get-go, what's our policy? It's deterrence. Well, let me explain. The Russians use a consistent phrase to describe our notion of deterrence. It's punishment by terror. Hitting back after we've received the first punch. Their notion of deterrence is defined by the concept of restraint, preventing the opponent from executing options like using nuclear weapons or like using fixed-wing aircraft. So the whole approach from the Russian side is just, it's not in the lexicon that we're using. And so to slip back into the blue role for a moment, if our policy is deterrence, we certainly aren't succeeding. We're failing. Because deterrence is in the eye of the beholder. And we simply aren't taking the Russian concepts and approach into our planning process as best as I can see it.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Before I allow General Hodges to answer, let me ask General Vronsky, because you mentioned air surveillance and aircraft monitoring, or whatever the term is. Let me ask General Vronsky, as a former Army pilot, you will no doubt disagree with people who say that since we have very sophisticated missile systems and drones, that it is actually, the role of Army aviation is not as important as it used to be. So what would you say to that?
Tak, jest bardzo dobre pytanie. Ja przepraszam, będę mówił po polsku, żeby lepiej być zrozumianym pomimo wszystko. Jeżeli weźmiemy pod uwagę, że scenariusze minionych czy historycznych czasów, one się nie powtórzą, nie będzie już takiej kalki, nie będzie już takiej możliwości wykonania identycznych posunięć przez przeciwnika, bo tak właśnie należałoby pojmować to, co się wydarzyło na Ukrainie, to, co się w Syrii wydarzyło, to, co się wydarzyło w innych krajach, to dzisiaj musimy zweryfikować swoje poglądy na ten temat, gdyż wielu ekspertów do tej pory powtarzało, że lotnictwo w takiej postaci, w jakiej jest, śmigłowce, samoloty, będą zmierzchem, że wejdzie nowa generacja broni, nowe aparaty latające, że wszystko zastąpią bezpilotowce i tak dalej. Chciałem zauważyć jedną bardzo ważną rzecz. Skoro te scenariusze mogą się nie powtórzyć już nigdy, to należy przyjąć na wiarę to, że jeżeli piętrowo mamy ułożone systemy bezpieczeństwa od kosmosu poprzez wysokie tak zwane lotnictwo, tak jak my mówimy, gdzie plasujemy F-35 za chwilę, F-16, niższe piętra, projekt Wisła, projekt Narew, niższe jeszcze poziomy, śmigłowce, później to wszystko, co jeździ i porusza się na ziemi, łącznie z tak zwanym tym butem wojskowym, to trzeba zweryfikować swoje poglądy i moi koledzy, eksperci, uderzamy się w pierś. Tak, przyszłość lotnictwa jak najbardziej jawi się w wielkim znaczeniu i teraz uwaga, w powiązaniu właśnie przy efekcie synergii razem z bezpilotowcami, z dronami, jak kto woli. Możemy tutaj odmieniać sobie przez różne przypadki. Ten efekt synergii lotnictwa połączony z urządzeniami, tak jak przy F-35, lojalny skrzydłowy, spowoduje, że najpierw poleci takie urządzenie, czy taki aparat o małej wartości, czy mniejszej wartości, który nawet możemy go poświęcić po to, żeby zanim samolot, który będzie wykonywał zadanie, żeby mógł bezpiecznie przelecieć. Jeżeli puścimy rój dronów, one uaktywnią wszelkie sensory, uaktywnią wszelkie systemy i za nimi pójdzie lotnictwo uderzeniowe.
Panie generale, czy ja mogę chwileczkę przerwać, bo mamy dwóch generałów, którzy nie rozumie. So if I can just give a short explanation, because they didn't have a translation. So the general is saying that, yes, we do have the sophisticated systems like the drones and everything, but you still need the aircraft in front of them in order to prepare the ground, to survey the scene. So it's not as if the air aviation is completely obsolete. You can't go into the modern systems without having a preparation. That is basically, in a précis, what he said.
From the Red perspective, they called it, during the Cold War, they called it the воздушная операция, an air operation. But even then, it started by missiles delivering strikes on airfields and including scatterable mines, because you can't take off on an airfield with high-performance aircraft with scatterable mines all over. So you have to shut down the main operating base and clean everything up before you can put it back into operation. Today, they call it an aerospace operation because it is even more heavily dependent on non-fixed-wing assets delivering the ordnance initially. So it's really starts with ballistic missiles and cruise missiles targeting the airfields, keeping us from launching our aircraft.
Tak, oczywiście i to jest pełna zgoda. Natomiast proszę zauważyć, że do wykonania jakiejkolwiek operacji przez wojska lądowe potrzebne jest panowanie w powietrzu. Nieważne, czy ono będzie stałe, czy ono będzie czasowe. Po to, żeby wykonać przewagę, będzie potrzeba zapanowania nad przestrzenią, nad strefą, na której dokonała się inwazja czy reakcja przeciwnika. A tutaj musimy jeszcze sobie jedną chyba bardzo ważną rzecz powiedzieć. Polska jako członek NATO, który do tej pory był w swojej większości wyposażony w tak zwaną technikę poradziecką, bardzo pilnie potrzebuje nowych, nowoczesnych maszyn. Ja rzeczywiście skupię się tutaj na lotnictwie, powiem o tak zwane, używając slangu lotniczego, lotnictwo szybkie, czyli odrzutowe, lotnictwo śmigłowcowe. Potrzebujemy najnowszych, najnowocześniejszych rozwiązań. I tu nie chodzi o to, żebyśmy bili rekordy w prędkościach, żebyśmy bili rekordy, mówię tu przykładowo do śmigłowców, żebyśmy bili inne rekordy na długotrwałość lotów, ponieważ będziemy operowali na flance wschodniej i zawsze będziemy wspierani przez piętro wyższe, czyli przez lotnictwo na przykład F-16 czy F-35. I łatwo zorientować się w tym momencie, że jeżeli przeciwnik nie do końca będzie wiedział, jak działają systemy, i tu prośba do moich kolegów, ekspertów, dziennikarzy, nie bądźcie na tyle wnikliwi, że będziecie chcieli wyciągnąć najdrobniejsze szczegóły częstotliwości, systemy, w jaki sposób systemy działają, bo to szaremu zjadaczowi chleba do niczego nie jest potrzebne. To jest nam, fachowcom potrzebne.
Mogę przerwać? General Hodges, would you like to respond to Dr. Peterson since he so vehemently disagreed with you?
Well, when I was a lieutenant, everybody disagreed with me. I had a lieutenant's view of the world. I don't disagree at all with what Phil has said about, I mean, I would defer to his knowledge about what a Soviet attack would have looked like in 1981 on the North German plain. But I'm sure the first thing I would have seen was probably some BMPs or tanks. So I defer to him. A very interesting point, though, that General Grumsey has just made, an emphasis on modern aircraft. And for sure, all of us are working hard to make sure that the women and men of our armed forces have the best possible equipment, the best capabilities that we need. But I would say the priority over modernization is making sure that you have readiness with what you have, which means you have to have all the women and men in the formations, in the ships, in the aircraft. So there's a manning component. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but I think it's worth repeating. And you have to have ammunition. Every exercise I've ever been on, all of the ammunition was gone by day 2. I'm talking about computer-assisted exercises, high-level conflict, because we still are in the mindset of Afghanistan. But the amount of interceptors, Hellfire missiles, artillery, Javelin, it is all gone by day 2. And so part of readiness is spending the money necessary to have the ammunition you need, the transport capability. So every chief of the general staff and every minister has to wrestle with readiness, capability, or size, and modernization. This is a continuous struggle that General Andrzejczak has to deal with, General Zorn has to deal with, and of course, General Milley in the United States has to deal with. If you'll allow me, one final point. These enhanced forward presence battle groups that are sitting, the American-led in Orzic, the German-led in Lithuania, the Canadian-led in Latvia, and the British-led in Estonia, I sometimes hear people refer to them as speed bumps in a sort of a dismissive way. And it's important to keep in mind that that German-led battle group is integrated into the Iron Wolf Brigade of Lithuania. And the Iron Wolf Brigade of Lithuania is integrated into the Territorial Defense of Lithuania, as well as what Multinational Corps Northeast is organizing. And the U.S.-led battle group in Orzic, it's not just 1,000 soldiers from the United States and Romania and UK and Croatia. If you see one American soldier, you're going to see those 26 Apache helicopters that Adam was talking about earlier. And you're going to see a sky full of U.S. Air Force, part of them as well. So these battle groups are actually substantial deterrent capability, assuming that they can talk to each other and that they are trained.
Gentlemen, we have 12 minutes left. I saw General Piotrowski, General Marlowe nodding when General Hodges was speaking. So can I quickly have your views before I turn it over again to Dr. Peterson, who is going to disagree? General Piotrowski, may I start with you?
Thank you very much. I fully agree. And to sum up a little bit, of course, our topic is thinking the unthinkable in land domain. This part, this front of NATO, from my perspective, is land-oriented with two seas on the flank. Of course, in the same time, we have to remember that we have at least 2 new domains, which is cyber and space. And having in mind our history, especially geography and recent events on our border, huge challenge for me as a Polish operational commander is to answer myself for the question which way we should follow as a mainly land-oriented army to prepare to implement multi-domain concept for the future operation, which is a huge challenge. But all the time having in mind that when we have struggled with Russia in the decisive point, in the open conflict as a last stage, it will be probably mainly conducted on the ground. Thank you very much.
General Marlow, what would you say, your comment?
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I fully share these points. The point is just, yes, we have to think a conflict joint and perhaps multi-domain, but from a land perspective, we have to find out which contribution we could deliver or what we can do in order to enhance the capabilities. And I think, first of all, as I said, from my perspective, it is key that we are seamlessly interoperable, especially with US forces, in a multi-domain environment. And secondly, because the air domain was mentioned, it is also critical for us capability to air defense as well as counter UAV capability in order to be able to defend ourselves. And other than that, it is the land contribution which is mainly based on a higher level of readiness. And I know that the nations as well as NATO is actively working on better concepts to how to increase the readiness to be able to more quickly respond to any kind of challenges. Thank you.
So we have 9 minutes left. I don't know whether there's anybody in the audience who desperately wants to ask a question.
I would like, Tomasz Mura, Polski Foundation, I would like also to mention another dimension. We discussed integrated air and missile defense this morning. We discussed aviation fixed one capabilities. We discussed cyber, but we haven't discussed yet electronic warfare dimension. As we know that Russia made a lot of progress in that kind of capabilities. We saw it in Ukraine, systems like Korchuka 2, for example, and this is definitely an area when our potential adversaries has advantage over the NATO countries. So, gentlemen, if you can share your insight, what we as the NATO states, as a NATO as a whole, do to improve our capabilities in electronic warfare dimension. Thank you.
So who would like to answer that?
So our electronic warfare capability had deteriorated so much that in Iraq, the Navy had to send over EW experts to help us do counter IED. We had lost that skill. We're trying to rebuild it. But I'm actually more worried about the EW capability that the Russian Federation forces have. When you think about these EFP battle groups in the Suwalki corridor area, all of them are within range of every electronic warfare system that the Russian Federation forces have. So if we're not able to speak in a secure frequency hopping tactical FM radio, for example, then every single unit is going to be jammed, targeted, and hit, just the way Ukrainian forces are. So that's why I like hearing General Marlow emphasizing the importance of interoperability so that all of our units can speak in a secure way that can't be jammed.
Any other questions?
Janusz Onyszkiewicz, Euro-Atlantic Association. I would like you to say something how to address the problem of tactical nuclear weapons, especially in a situation that in Russia, informally, but still is a lot of talk about so-called de-escalation with the use of tactical nuclear weapons.
Actually, the Russians have a accepted concept of escalate to de-escalate, and that goes all the way up to nuclear strikes against American coastal cities. So using cruise missiles, eliminating our ability to move troops and material to Europe, and they would indicate that, look, we don't want a strategic exchange, so we're using cruise missiles so you don't mistake that for some massive strike. So it's at the highest level and it's at the lowest level. Unlike the US, we made it a federal crime to develop fourth-generation nuclear weapons. The Russians have developed it. They have weapons that are sub 0.2 of a kiloton. That's so small that it's going to be difficult for an American commander to even be able to reliably report back that he's just been hit by a nuclear weapon. So it's it's the ninth element of new generation warfare, and we're not even talking about it.
If I may, one statement. Of course, I fully agree, and we know that using of nuclear weapon is an integral part of Russia's concept of new generation warfare, as was mentioned by Mr. Peterson. What we can do, we can answer them and show them that we are determined, as, of course, as NATO, not as each single nation. We are determined to answer appropriately and relatively to the threat. And it means that we are able to use in the same time, in the same manner like Russia does.
I think there were two questions on the right there.
So I am Sigita Struberg, Latvian Transatlantic Organization. I will have a question not regarding weapons, but regarding hybrid warfare. I would like to ask regarding migrants pushed on our borders at the moment. So Lithuania, Poland, they were mentioned before, but actually Latvia is facing the same situation at the moment. And by the way, I did some focus groups in parts of society in borderlands. They don't talk about readiness. They talk about how scared they are. But my question is, so if we define it as a hybrid warfare, or if we define it as a part of Zapad 2021, which was also mentioned here, so how would you define it, hybrid warfare or part of exercises? And what does it mean for NATO? What would be appropriate reaction from NATO side?
Don't know who would like to. General Petrosky.
Of course, I can't answer as a NATO itself as organization, but I can answer as a Polish officer. We, as you, ma'am, know, we suffer a lot last weeks. This kind of procedure, let me say, and process, but because it is not an operation, it is definitely, from my perspective, it is my personal opinion, of course, it is definitely not at the part as exercise Zapad 2021. It is real operation against let me say, cohesion of alliance. Probably it will be, and it is, huge challenge for NATO as well as for European Union, how we pass such kind of exam. Because it is real info, but not only info, psychological operation from Russia side, not a single Belarus as a single country. From my perspective, Belarus is only tool in the Kremlin's hands. It's not a part of exercise. It is real operation. Thank you.
I think it's more of a role for the EU than it is for NATO. I mean, this is an attempt by Belarus to undermine cohesion and challenge the European Union by giving them this problem with migrants. And I think the EU should be doing more to protect three of its members, Poland and Lithuania and Latvia, from the negative messaging that's out there now, the images. And only the EU has the diplomatic and economic power to force the Kremlin to put pressure on Minsk to stop it, and also the ability to cause Iraq to stop it at the source, as allowing people to get on planes to fly into Belarus. So I think the EU has a lot more to do here than does the alliance.
We have time for one mini question, very quick. So let me ask the panel very quickly then, one last question. We hear a lot about Army Europe. Yes, no, quickly. You think that this is feasible? Will it happen in the next 5 years? Yes, European Army.
European Army, I'm totally for the very strong, ready fight tonight NATO army, and we should focus on such kind of activity.
Yeah, I fully share that we have NATO, and that is a proven alliance, but we as Europeans should bring more on the table in that regards.
I think we're at war today. Pure and simple, we should stop thinking about cyber war. It's called information war in the Soviet Union or in Russia, and it's comprised of the technical tools like cyber and intellectual tools like cognitive warfare.
Ja chciałem zwrócić uwagę, żeby nie zapominać o wszystkich narzędziach, którymi człowiek w ogóle dysponuje. Jeżeli na poprzednich ćwiczeniach Zapad, ja nie mówię na tych, które były teraz ostatnio, Rosjanie wyciągnęli swoje urządzenia pracujące na lampach analogowe, to proszę zauważyć, że czemuś to służy i nie zapominajmy o tak zwanej technice, która już minęła.
I don't know what a European army does. I mean, what if people can't define what it would be? Then why are we wasting time and energy on this? The Bundeswehr and Polish armed forces are already very busy trying to fulfill their NATO and national requirements. Why? I mean, what would we be accomplishing? So this is a political debate, and it's a waste of time.
Okay, we'll sum it up. So I think we're all for an Army Europe, if there were going to be one, but working together with NATO. Gentlemen, illustrious generals, I mean, really, apart from Dr. Peterson and myself, I'm surrounded by uniforms. Thank you, and very interesting discussion, and I look forward to speaking with you all very time soon. Thank you.